Okay, so Greg Piccirilli, who I've gotten very close with over the last, God, it's a year.
Called me 5 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, he texts me, then I call him. Greg.
So I know it's getting a little late, and I'm going to I'll try to keep it a little briefer than I had planned. Malcolm said it, Dr. Colleen said it, Dr. Scully said it. They want power, right? But there's a radio guy I like to listen to. His name's Chris Plant. He has this great saying: what they don't want to ban, they want to mandate. That's power. And they can also be arbitrary about it. One day it's banned. The vaccine. Brittany mentioned it. In August of 2021, there was a vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. In October of 21, Barrington had it for teachers. 2 days ago, the federal government just said, well, you know what? Now the vaccine can't be mandated anymore. It's illegal. The first 2 doses, the ones that they wanted Brittany to take, the ones they wanted Doc Scully to take, they are now illegal. What they don't want to make mandatory, they want to ban. Remember that. I don't know how I got into this. I got 4 clients here tonight, and I met some great guys. I mean, Andy, just an amazing human being. Brilliant like nobody I've ever met before. And not just about medical stuff. He's a broad range of knowledge. But I'll tell you how it started. My wife, I think, is watching this right now. About 3 years ago, you guys all remember the lockdown, and you're sitting around and you find out whether or not you're really compatible with your wife at that time. And we were exactly on the same page. But she got me in thinking about what was happening when we're on TV. You're watching TV, and they closed the beaches. Do you remember that? They closed beaches. Okay, first 15 days to stop the spread. The local bar closed, the local restaurants. Okay, well, actually the liquor stores didn't close, but. So she had me watch a video. She started really intensely studying this. It bothered her. And my wife is completely apolitical. She is not someone who, but the last 3 years have changed her completely. And she had me watch a video of Robert Kennedy Jr. This was in April or May of 2020. And I knew who he was, obviously, and when I was in law school, there were 3 cases that he argued in the U.S. Supreme Court about administrative law. I wasn't a fan of his, and probably didn't agree with most of what he stood for. But I knew he was a brilliant man, and I knew he knew things like administrative law. What's administrative law? It's agencies. The Department of Health is an agency. The Department of Education is an agency. They're supposed to do things like, have hearings before they issue a regulation. Before they tell you to do something or not to do something, they go through what's called a normal regulatory process. That's been the law in this country for almost 100 years. And people like Robert Kennedy Jr. helped create that. And what do you do in a regulatory hearing? You have people present evidence in science. He made the point, this was at the beginning of the lockdowns. He said, the thousands of hearings he had been in, there's always witnesses on both sides. There's always experts on both sides. The science is never settled. If you ever hear that, that is the most insidious statement I've ever heard. It started with the climate change stuff, but then they took it into masks and vaccines and lockdowns. The science is settled. So there's no debate on it. The science is never settled. He made a point. Do you know For 40 some odd years, there are economists and scientists who have been able to calculate how many people die with a 1% decrease in GDP. Someone in England, I think it was 80,000 people will die. Depression, suicide, lack of health care, for whatever reason. They can quantify that. Well, if they can quantify that, why didn't, when they had the lockdowns, why didn't they say, okay, well, you know, we're going to save X number of lives, but we're going to cost X number of lives? They never said that. And you know how they got around it? Emergency. When it's an emergency, they can do whatever they want. So I get involved. I do represent a school committee in Rhode Island, and I'm very aware. I've been doing it for 30 some odd years, and the mask mandates just made no sense to me. So some Gloucester residents recruited me after a school committee meeting one night, and said, "You gotta help us stop this." And that's how I ended up meeting Andy, who's from Gloucester as well, and he spoke at a number of committee meetings. And I thought we were going to have a nice hearing before a judge and say, you know, we'll present our evidence. And Andy presented amazing evidence. Everything he said, there's 13 randomized controlled trials that prove masks don't work, or lack of evidence that masking works in any number of settings. Studies that show masks can be harmful. Oh, we don't listen to that. Instead, Dr. McDonald gets up and testifies. What studies did you? Oh, there was a study with mannequins. They had 6 mannequins sitting around a conference table, immobile, with a mask on, and they blew air around the room. 30% reduction in inhalation. They're mannequins. You're gonna have 6 kids in a classroom sitting around immobile? Another one was a Facebook survey. They're presenting this as evidence in a court of law. But what really got me, and Andy alluded to this, the first day of trial, Dr. McDonald says, and there have been 3 deaths of children in the state from COVID. Because of, and we got it in the transcript, because of COVID. So right after that, I had a conference with Bill. Now, the Attorney General's office is defending the state. I'm up against the AG, right? 4 lawyers or me all by myself. I said, Dr. McDonald just perjured himself. We have evidence. We know that that's not true. Oh, well, he must have misspoke. So the next day, he gets on the stand and he retracts what he says. Because in perjury, you can't be convicted of perjury if you recant while you're still testifying. So I asked him, I said, well, doctor, you keep talking about COVID deaths. Let's get this clear. We're talking about people who die with COVID or because of COVID. You mix them together. Well, yeah. I said, so a 16-year-old kid is driving down the street, gets shot in the head, rushed to the hospital. Right before the kid dies, he tests positive for COVID. Is that a COVID death? Yeah. Yes. Good on video. I said, doctor, you can't be. Why? Well, that's how we started it. It's too late now to change. I'm a lawyer. This is what I've been doing for 30 years. If that was a medical malpractice case, and an expert witness goes up and testified like that, probably would have been held in contempt and fined, and I would have gotten a default judgment against them for just stupidity. But we live in the era of COVID, right? COVID law. Settled law for hundreds of years suddenly goes out the window because you got to get Trump. Regardless of how you feel about the guy, do you really want to destroy 400 years of science and legal prudence because of that? So, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So let me just change because it's moving along here. So started with the masking lawsuit and ended up representing Doc Scully next. Got a call to help, and Doc had a very good lawyer, Christy Durant. She works for the Dental Association, very knowledgeable about the Department of Health. When I was helping her with Doc's case, she said, "You're not going to believe some of the stuff that they do. You will not believe the lunacy, the illogic that you will have to deal with." I said, "Well, I just ended a mass lawsuit with Dr. McDonald. How could it be worse than that?" Oh, it was worse than that. Doc Scully, do you know, we found out later that the Department of Health did a cost-benefit analysis. What they're supposed to do, when you have a regulation, balance the cost versus the benefit, the risk versus the benefit. That's why they dropped the healthcare mandate in Rhode Island. And then the federal government snuck it in with Medicaid. But they dropped it in Rhode Island. The reason they dropped it, do you know of the 20-some-odd thousand healthcare workers who were affected by the mandate, about 1,200 or so didn't get the vaccine, didn't get fired, didn't lose their jobs, didn't get a compliance order. He's the only one, the only medical professional in the state to get a compliance order. Why? He was told, if you just kept your mouth shut. Now, we were having hearings at the Department of Health. They were remote, of course, which presents its own problem. And the hearing officer said, well, why, you're not following the regulations. They couldn't even cite the regulations that they claimed they were following. And then finally they said, we don't have to follow the regulations because it's COVID, right? It's an emergency. So, we go on for about 6 months. We ended up getting a great law firm, a federal public interest firm to help file a federal lawsuit for Doc. And we have a pre-hearing conference with a federal court judge in Rhode Island. And the state's position is that natural immunity doesn't work. You can't argue that. So this lawyer from New York City, retired, in his 70s, had been retired, practicing for 50 years. He tries to start arguing this, and the judge cut him off. The science is settled. Natural immunity doesn't work. A week later, they dropped the mandate and they let him practice again. We were supposed to start a TRO hearing. We sent a letter to the judge, we don't need the hearing anymore. What? We have a conference. Why not? They dropped the mandate. What do you mean they dropped the mandate? I thought the science was settled. That lasted a week, a month. After that, Andy got me involved with the Barrington teachers. I think we had finished a hearing at Southwell case. We're sitting having a little after hearing drink at Hemingway's. And Andy gets a call and says, "There's these 3 Barrington teachers. They're going to be fired tonight, and their union won't represent them because they won't take the vaccine." So I went, and I met my 3 clients there that night, and I met the union lawyer. I said, and I've been doing schoolwork a long time, usually for school departments, firing teachers, going up against unions who have represented teachers who have diddled kids, have stolen money, have been completely incompetent. You won't represent these people, these poor teachers? A lawyer for the union, the NEA, who I've known for a long time, 20-some odd years, told me that I was evil. Because you're involved in that mass case. You want kids to die? He said this to me.
Who's the lawyer?
John DeCubelis.
I know John.
Yeah. Well, tell him I said that. Okay? Because I still haven't talked to him since then. And I'm going to be suing him soon. A side note, I have never been so disgusted with my own profession. Just like doctors and teachers and politicians and all kinds of professionals. we're supposed to be professionals. We're supposed to, if you feel like you're being done wrong, what do? You go to your politician. You go to court. Or you do what Malcolm says. You fight like hell and get angry. Because what other choice do you have, right? But we're supposed to be able to do things in the court system. I knew we were in trouble when I was in law school. We studied a case called Buck v. Bell. I've told this story to some people. 1927. Carrie Buck was a mentally challenged person, they called him retarded back then, who the state of Virginia wanted to forcibly sterilize against her will because they didn't want her to get pregnant again and have her children be mentally challenged and end up being wards and cost the state money. So I went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., some of you might have heard that name, one of the most prominent judges in this country's ever had. He said, well, there's another case called Jacobson versus Massachusetts. Some of you may have heard that. The vaccine case. That case hasn't been cited since 1927. That was a 1905 case. It was cited. When we were in law school, it was a joke. Nobody considered that a real case. But all of a sudden, it resurrected itself because they want to use that as a justification for say, well, vaccine mandates as long, the government has the power to do that. Well, in 1927, Holmes said, well, certainly if the federal government, or any government, can mandate forced vaccination, certainly they can mandate forced sterilization. Think about that. That case has never been overturned. By the way, the last sentence in that decision, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. He wrote that. 20 years later, during the Nuremberg trials, after World War II, they put Nazi doctors on trial for forcibly sterilizing any number of people. Unclean. Burdens to the state. And the defense lawyer says, he gets Oliver Wendell Holmes' decision. He says, 20 years ago, your Justice Holmes said that you can do this. It led to World War II. It led to the Holocaust. So sometimes I get over dramatic with these things, but the fact that we've been able to fight back, I think, stops that from getting to that more dramatic point. The last thing I want to mention is another client of mine here. Josh Nagel, the dad, who's got 2 young girls, 5 and 8 years old. And he doesn't want them vaccinated. They should not be vaccinated. They're perfectly healthy. They've already had COVID. They have natural immunity. I've had to deal with a situation, and I have to be careful because I'm not supposed to criticize judges. But I'll just say this. I had a judge who kept comparing COVID to polio. The vaccine's the polio vaccine. Polio vaccines stop transmission, COVID vaccines don't. More importantly, as Andy said, polio is a horrible disease. COVID is not, for kids. But that's the kind of mentality you have to get past. And this also happened in the Barrington case. People still think, there are people out there that still think that the COVID vaccine stops transmission. They will say it. Their excuse for firing these Barrington teachers was the little kids. We're doing it for the kids. They may get sick. Well, yeah, they're going to get sick regardless, probably from their vaccinated teacher or their vaccinated family. Yeah. And they did. So the logical inconsistencies that I've had to deal with in all these cases has been infuriating to me. Because, you can argue opinions, but you can't argue facts. And we've gotten to the point where people will willfully ignore evidence and facts because they have an agenda to push. And whether they're lying, or whether they're stupid, or whether they're afraid, they're doing it. And you can't stop challenging them. And I'll just leave it at that.